Okay. Impeachment. There are 3.5 times that we've had presidents impeached. And I say the half times because it kind of is important because it does give you an illumination of what impeachment's about and kind of the steps. So let's talk about the steps first. How can you get impeached? Well, there's only 3 things in the Constitution that you get impeached for. 3, that's it. And that third one is super vague, and that's probably why all impeachments revolve around that third one. So the first one, treason. Treason. You act against the interest of your country, willingly, knowingly doing things against your country's interests. Treason. Okay? Bribery. If you do something for me, I'll do something for you. But you got to give me some money first. Bribery. Those 2 articles have never been invoked or used during these 3.5 impeachments. It's that third clause. It's that third reason that every impeachment that has ever happened, try to happen, focuses on. And here's the wording. Other high crimes and misdemeanors. And misdemeanors has an actual legal connotation to it. There's felonies and misdemeanors. Misdemeanors are like small. But high crimes and misdemeanors. That's like this weird umbrella term or terms that the government, the Senate and the House, well, particularly the House to start off, can look into to see if you should be impeached and possibly kicked out of office through the Senate trial. Now let's talk about the steps. I'm going to shorten them up because impeachment is actually a little complex with all the different types of hearings and meetings and all these different committees that get together. But basically this is how it works. 1, the president has to do something that gets the eye of Congress, specifically the House. Some sort of action that the House goes, what? And then they're going to start the investigation process. This investigation is either going to turn up stuff that they think warrants an impeachment vote or doesn't warrant an impeachment vote. If it does warrant, as in it shows that we should at least vote on this, it's going to go to the House floor. There's some steps in between, but just know, step 1, president does something that Congress goes, what? Step 2, Congress, specifically the House of Representatives, they investigate. Step 3, the House is going to take it to a vote. If step 3 turns out that it's not a simple majority, so let's say if there's 100 people, and if it's a simple majority, it'd be 51. If 51 people vote that this person is guilty of or not guilty, use the correct terms here, if the articles of impeachment have evidence to warrant a trial, 51 people vote for it, it's going to go to the Senate if it's 100 people. If 49 people vote for it and 51 vote against it, then the impeachment just dies. It doesn't go anywhere else. It's not going to go to the Senate. Now, the House is not voting to kick out the president. A lot of people have this misconception that impeachment means kick out the president. The House is voting and basically stating that through investigation, the members of the House, which is 435, members of the House have seen the evidence that shows that we should at least have a trial to determine guilt. The House does not hold the trial, but if they vote a simple majority, over half, that he does warrant a trial because there's enough evidence to prove that, he's going to go to the Senate next, or this investigation will then push to the Senate, which they will then do the actual trial itself. This is where it gets tricky. After impeachment is decided upon in the House and it goes to the Senate, it's not a simple majority anymore. It has to be 2/3 of the senators, 66, 67 votes, okay? That means that you're probably going to need to have both Democrats and Republicans say, yep, this person's guilty before kicking him out. They're going to hold a trial, and if the Senate agrees, over 2/3 of the senators say, yep, he's guilty, they vote, the president would be kicked out of office. This has never happened. As a matter of fact, every single time it ends up in the Senate, it pretty much ends exactly the same. It goes down party lines. Republicans protect the Republicans. Democrats protect the Democrats. That's pretty much what's happened every single time. The closest it's ever been was with Johnson, and he missed it by 1 vote. So it's pretty much a partisan issue when it gets to the Senate, at least history's sake. It's not really just seemed very judicial. It just seems to be political. At least the way history has viewed this in the last 3 times. The only one that probably would have been different was Nixon, but we'll get to that in just a moment. So let's just go through the steps. President has to commit at least one of those three infractions: bribery, treason, or high crimes and misdemeanors. So far, all the ones we've had, high crimes and misdemeanors, are the only things they've ever talked about. 2, the House is going to notice that. They're going to investigate. And then 3, they're going to hold a vote. If they vote simple majority, it's going to go to the Senate for the trial, which is 4. They will do the trial, and then they will vote. If it's 2/3, president is out of there, which has never happened in history. And if it's under 2/3, the president stays, which has happened every single time this has happened. Pretty much down party lines every single time. And you can say, well, Mr. Snow, there was like that one time that one Republican or that one Democrat. Generally speaking, down party lines. It's maybe 1, 2, or 3 on the other side that will vote against their party's candidate, but generally speaking, down party lines. Let's get to the more specifics of impeachment. Here we go. I'm going to go through all 3.5 impeachment issues with presidents. So there's only 3 presidents that were impeached. There was another one that I'm going to talk about first that was going to be impeached, but he resigns. And this is how the first person who was kind of impeached but not really is Nixon. And Nixon, here's the backstory. There's the Watergate scandal. This is what the Watergate scandal was. You have a Republican, you have Democratic parties, right? Nixon was Republican, and he actually was spying on the Democratic National Convention headquarters. They actually had people go into the headquarters and like get information. Eventually these people were caught, and then eventually it started linking up to Nixon. Now, back then, there was like this year-long investigation going on, and one of the investigators started asking for Nixon's tapes. See, Nixon was known as a guy, as president, to record like every conversation with somebody who was sitting in his office. So people were like, hey, give us the tapes so we can either clear you for wrongdoing or we can see that you actually did something wrong. And Nixon goes, no. And what he did, instead of giving the tapes over, because they was actually going through the court system, the Supreme Court was going to rule that he had to get the tapes up. Before the Supreme Court did that, he goes, I'm just going to fire the prosecutor. So he fires the prosecutor that's investigating him, which is like the Friday Night Massacre, something like that. And alarm bells start going off. The House, it starts to investigate this even more, and they start finding credible evidence that, yeah, Nixon was behind this, and this is bad news bears. So what happens next is they get 3 articles of impeachment drafted to or on Nixon. They're about to go to the House, and they're about to vote on impeachment. At this point, Nixon goes, well, I'm done. And so he resigns before the impeachment vote takes place. So yes, he wasn't impeached, but he was like right there, and then he resigns. So, and then his vice president takes over, and then he pardons him. Pardon basically is like a get-out-of-jail-free card. The president has the right, the power, according to the Constitution, to pardon people, and he pardoned Nixon. So basically, they couldn't convict him of anything on this particular case because he was pardoned. Okay, here's the first actual impeachment that took place. Johnson, okay, and this is the one that's like in the time era that we're teaching in class, or we're learning in class. It's Reconstruction. Johnson, he was egocentric. I mean, crazy. We talk about in another video. He was all about himself, and he was also a self-made man, which is respectable. He was a self-made man. He really pushed himself to his limits to get where he was. But he had kind of what's called a chip on your shoulder. Like he was the best, and he wanted to prove himself, and he always had to try to prove himself. And what happens is he starts butting heads with Congress. There's the White House and there's Congress. Make the laws, enforce the laws. Well, he starts butting heads with Congress, and he starts doing these things called vetoes, which is basically stopping legislation from going through, laws from being passed. He sets a couple records. We talked about this before. But anyway, he has this confrontational relationship with Congress. And what this eventually leads to is Congress passes a law called the Tenure of Office Act. What this means is the president cannot fire secretaries or members of the White House without congressional approval. And it was basically a trap. It's a trap! It was a trap because what they were doing was they knew that Johnson was going to come in and he was going to break that law. So he breaks that act and he fires Edwin Stanton. Edwin Stanton's gone, and then Congress jumps and they're like, all right, we're going to start an impeachment trial. They start an impeachment investigation within the House of Representatives. They vote for impeachment for breaking the law. It falls under that third category of high crimes and misdemeanors. And then he goes to the Senate, and he misses misses conviction in the Senate by 1 vote. And understand, this was like popular. People actually bought tickets and actually were scalping tickets of this trial in the Senate for Johnson. So crazy stuff. Okay, the second person who was actually impeached was actually a little bit closer to our time, and it was in the 90s, and it was Bill Clinton. And man, I could talk about this for a long time because I actually grew up in it. Like, I remember watching the news reports on this when I was a kid, actually like your age. So here's what was going on. Clinton was being investigated basically when he became president by a guy named Ken Starr. Ken Starr was a conservative. It doesn't really matter, but he was conservative, and he was investigated for 7 years. For about 7 years, Bill Clinton was under investigation. He was president for 8 years, so keep that in mind. So about 7 years, actually a little bit prior to his investigation, but he was investigated for a while. And they were investigating him for Whitewater, which was like a land scheme deal. They was investigating for like the suicide of somebody that worked for him, and a few other different things. None of those things really held water, but there was this one thing of sexual harassment charge against Bill Clinton about a woman named Paula Jones. Now, this was before he was president, so he has this harassment charge placed against him, against Paula Jones, and eventually the Supreme Court decides that a sitting president can be actually called into court for civil suits. It's kind of an issue I'm not going to get into right now, because then if you have this situation where presidents can then have to go to court for civil suits, which they really don't have to anymore, it can cause a complication, but it kind of did. But we'll get to this. So they have President Lincoln, sitting president, and he's answering questions under oath. And they must have found out that he was having a relationship with this Monica Lewinsky, which I'm not going to go into the specific details. Basically, he was having a relationship with this woman. And not Paula Jones, different woman. And they ask him on the stand, what's going on, basically? Are you having a relationship with this woman? And his exact words, I want to make sure I don't misquote this, is, "There is nothing going on between us." And the reason why I'm saying this specifically, word for word, is because this is like literally the main portion of the meal when it comes to impeachment, is the word "is," because he was having a relationship with her. There's evidence to that, which I'm not going to get into. But the word "is" can be used either, is this mean right now? Like, currently am I in a relationship? Or have I ever? And Bill Clinton was basically arguing the "is" implying right now, in the future we're not. But he wasn't referring to his past. But this turns into a perjury charge, which is like the main meat and potatoes of the impeachment, and then also an obstruction of justice. Which, by the way, obstruction of justice is like this nice little topping they put on charges. If you pay attention to law stuff at all, it's like obstruction of justice is sprinkled on top, because he gets charged with that at top, basically saying that he was making people, or he was influencing people not to come forward with this information. So they have the impeachment in the House. They vote for impeachment because it's Republican-held House, but then it has to go to the Senate, and the Senate's controlled by Democrats, and it has to be 2/3 anyway, and down party lines, basically. There was a couple Democrats that went to the other side, but generally speaking, down party lines, they voted to acquit him. They voted to say that he didn't deserve impeachment. Or sorry, not impeachment. They didn't deserve conviction and being kicked out of office. He was impeached by the House, but the Senate says, well, that's it. That's where it stops, because not enough votes to kick him out. Okay, the most recent one. Now, the most recent one is going to be a kind of a touchy subject, because I'm telling you, people in politics these days, you can't talk about it without someone getting upset. So here we go. I'm going to try to make this as clean as possible. Go ahead and ask your parents, what do they think about it? Because I guarantee you, depending on the house that you live in, and I don't mean like big house, small house, brown house, blue house. I mean just like the parents, their political beliefs. The way it seems is, if you're this type of political belief, you're going to say this. If you're this political belief, you're going to say this. But I really don't care what the belief is. I just look at like what's going on. I'm going to tell you what's going on and what happened. So President Trump, he was impeached for 2 articles of impeachment. One was abuse of power, and the other was obstruction of justice. Remember that thing I told you gets sprinkled on top pretty much as many times as it can be? That gets sprinkled on top. So here's what's happening. The abuse of power comes in this idea that he had this phone call with people of Ukraine, and in the phone call, the Democrats of the House, as well as the Senate, but the Democrats of the House were arguing that it was coming off like well, I'll do this if you do this, and it was basically preventing aid from Ukraine unless Ukraine looked into a political rival. And then The obstruction charge was the fact that Trump was not allowing people to go and actually testify and share information, and he wasn't either. He wasn't really sharing the information that was being requested. So that's the obstruction of justice, the sprinkling on top. So it goes to the Senate because the House votes down party lines, and then it goes to the Senate, and the Senate, because party lines, the Senate's controlled by Republicans, just like all the other ones, they do not vote to convict, so they don't convict. So he's impeached, but he's not convicted. There's a whole bunch of things you should really look at. I suggest don't watch the news on this. And no offense to parents, but don't really listen to parents. If you really want to know about this, just read the documents. There's documents that you can read yourself, and you can just go, oh, that does look like this, or that doesn't look like this. Make the judgment for yourself. All you got to say is, man, when you talk about politics these days, people get their little feathers ruffled. But, all right, that's impeachment. We're going to go through time and talk about every single time, which has been 5, that the Electoral College has decided the winner of the presidency of a person who did not win the majority of the people's votes. Because remember, I've said this before, and I'll say it 100 times. It is not about how many votes you get of the individual person that votes that makes you the president of the United States. Doesn't matter. What matters is how many points you got in the Electoral College. That's the system we have, folks. It's not about popularity. It's about the Electoral College. So let's get into it. The first one is John Quincy Adams here in the middle. And he is going against Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson is the man of the people. Okay? He's a guy that has gotten in duels. Boom! He actually has a bullet in his body that's been there for like years. He is a rough and tumble guy. He fought in the War of 1812 and he won major victory there. And then you got John Quincy Adams, the son of a former president, a man of the establishment. Dun, dun, dun. And these two go at it. Now, it's actually 4 people that are running this election, but I cut the 4th one out. That guy over there is a guy named Henry Clay. He's a member of the House. And what's going to happen here is nobody gets enough electoral points in this election because there's 4 people running, and it kind of splits it all up. And even though Jackson is ahead in the game, you can kind of see this right here. He's ahead in the game here. Popular vote, 152,000. 152,000. Everyone else is at least 30 or 40,000 below that. He has more electoral points. He has 99. John Quincy Adams, only 84. But guess what's going to happen? Even though he right now has more electoral points, he doesn't have enough to secure the number that he needs back then to win the presidency. So the House of Representatives, who happens to be run by this guy, Henry Clay, the 4th place person, ends up giving all the rest of the electoral points to John Quincy Adams. That's right, folks. There were contested states, and they eventually end up giving all the contested states to John Quincy Adams. The 2nd place runner-up becomes president. Now you're like, Mr. Snow, maybe there's a good reason. There probably is, but here's what the shady deal is. You have Henry Clay, the Speaker of the House, all of a sudden gets nominated as John Quincy Adams, Secretary of State. Now you're like, what does that matter? It matters, because up to this point, Secretary of State was the jumping off point to become president. Basically, Henry Clay, it looks like he made a shady deal with John Quincy Adams. I'll get you those points. You give me the position. And then they did! And Jackson was obviously mad, but he will become president, just not this time. The second time this happens is when you can't see it because for some reason there's like this giant yellow thing, which is terrible. But it's the election of 1876, and this is what's going on in our time. This is like what's happening in time as far as in the classroom during Reconstruction. Then this election, you have Tilden versus Rutherford, and actually Rutherford thinks he's losing by the time he goes to bed that night. Tilden wins over 252,000 more popular votes. Rutherford, he's losing. Except, here's the deal. Tilden is that is it, one electoral vote away for becoming the presidency. And there are 3 states that are contested. All 3 states are awarded to Rutherford B. Hayes. You're like, Mr. Snow, come on, that doesn't, hold on. The 3 states that were given to him happened to be states that wanted Reconstruction to end. And when he was given these points, the first thing he does, or one of the first things he does as president, is he pulls all the military out of the South and ends Reconstruction. So this very much looks like, I'll do something for you, you do something for me. So Tilden loses the election because of the Electoral College, and most likely because of a rotten deal in the back. This kind of like ruins the presidency of Hayes. He doesn't do a whole lot after this. Matter of fact, presidents after this, after Hayes, all the way up until Theodore Roosevelt, 4 or 5 presidents later, there's really not a lot going on. So the next one, and you can see here the votes here, how it spreads out, but just know 200,000 plus votes. This one's an interesting one. In the election of 1888, you have Cleveland versus Harris. Cleveland actually wins more popular votes again, obviously, 94,000. It's not that many more compared to the last one. But in this case, there's not really a whole lot of shady deals that go on. Cleveland just, there's this idea with electoral points that end up awarded to Harrison because the state's population versus the points are skewed a bit, which we'll talk about later. Cleveland, though, actually his wife says, don't worry, folks, we'll be back in the White House next time. And it's true. Cleveland actually will serve the only president to serve non-consecutive terms. So he loses this election, then he comes back the next go-around and wins it again. So let's go to, here we go. These are all modern day. So this is when I was alive. This is 2000. You will see here Gore actually won 543,000 more votes than President Bush. Well, back then, candidate Bush. So he won over 500,000 votes. Now, this is what happens. I'm going to go through this really quick. But here's what happened in 2000. Florida. Florida just has issues with voting. I don't know what's going on. What happened was that state, their points in that state were the ones that mattered. Now, Gore is up. He has, they have to get like to 270, and Gore is at like 255, and Bush is at like 240 something. But Florida is the last state remaining to be counted, and it has 20 plus electoral votes. So whoever wins Florida is going to win the whole thing. Well, Bush is ahead, but he's only ahead by like 900 votes in a state that produces millions of votes. So Gore asked for a recount because if it's that close, you get a recount. Then there was restrictions on how fast the recount has to happen. Gore was upset about this. They go to court, blah, 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 blah. And the districts that they recounted in, some of them didn't hit the deadline. But the ones that did hit the deadline, it actually made Gore actually closer to Bush. So as these counts are going on, Gore is getting closer and closer to the votes. Eventually, it goes to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court decides to let the lower court's ruling stand. The lower court's ruling stand was that basically the election was going to be called. At this point, Gore just says, okay, I'm going to let it be known I'm going to accept defeat, even though some of the votes may not have been counted. And he just allows the process to go on. He does something for the benefit of the country. Because you have to understand something. In 2000, during this time, there was a lot of issues. There was a lot of anger because you see that somebody wins this many votes over somebody else is going to lose. You see that some votes aren't going to be counted. So there's like this issue of people upset. And so Gore goes, you know what? I'm not going to contest this anymore. I'm going to let the things happen. Bush, you're president. Let's just make sure we have a unified front. And it was good that he did that. And unfortunately for Bush, is he gets into office, and one of the first things he has to deal with is 9/11. 2001, we get attacked, and then it's just kind of crazy from there because his whole presidency is kind of marred with a war, actually multiple wars in the Middle East, and then we have the 2008 recession at the end. So it was a rough time. All right, now we're gonna get to the most recent one, and that is the election of 2016. Election of 2016, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by 2,864,000, almost 3 million, but 2,864,000 popular votes. Remember, I told you this before. It doesn't matter about the popular votes. It's all about the Electoral College. That's how our Constitution is established. You might be mad at it, but that's how it is. So here it is. What happens here in this election, which is just amazing, is there are a few states, Wisconsin, Michigan, that typically go blue, specifically Michigan. And Trump swings it, and it goes red. And this really creates the situation that allows him for the victory. Now, one thing we'll talk about in just a few moments is the electoral map and how it looks. And for Republicans right now, the last few elections, if they don't win Florida, they're not going to win. It's based on you can just tell by the points. It's a mathematical thing, and we'll talk about that later. But yeah, she wins the popular vote by almost 3 million, but she loses the election. Because I'm telling you, it's about the electoral points. It's not about the population. Electoral college. What is it? How does it work? Why does it do what it does? Okay, so you have the population of the United States, and they all live in different states. Okay, obviously, United States, states. We live in Illinois, if you don't know. So we all live in different states, and we basically have an election. The election that people vote for right now, parents, uncle, grandparents, whoever's voting for this election this year in your family, if they do, they actually aren't voting for the president directly. And a matter of fact, it's not even close to like that. It's a lot more complicated than that. So I'm going to talk about this. When you walk away, you're going to understand what the Electoral College is, how it works the way it works, and just some of the consequences of having it, because there are consequences of having these systems. Let's talk about it. All right, Electoral College. First things first, it's not about getting all the people to vote for you. As we will talk about and have talked about, there are 5 times that a person running for presidency won more votes, more people voted for him. In the case of one case, almost 3 million more people voted for them, and they didn't win the presidency. Because it's the Electoral College that matters, it's not about popular vote. It's really not about individual people, it's about states. States are given more power than people, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. So let's talk about how this works. There's a total of 538 electoral points, okay? It's 435 representatives in the House, plus 3 more for the District of Columbia, D.C. Then there's 100 senators, so you add another 100 onto that number, you get 538 total electoral points. You have to win 270. If you hit the 270 mark of electoral points, you win the presidency, period, point blank, you're done. How do you win it? Well, let's talk about it. It's a winner-take-all system for each state. So basically, think of this like 51, counting the District of Columbia, 51 individual elections, and then those individual elections get added up, and eventually you get to see who wins. There are only 2 states that it's not winner-take-all. It's like Nebraska and Maine. They actually divvied up by the popular vote. So what I mean by this is, let's imagine you have the state of Illinois, which you live in. Everyone's going to go vote for the president. Technically not, but they're going to put their vote for a president and at the Illinois ballot. Let's imagine, make it easy. It's 100 people in Illinois that are going to vote for the president this year. Let's make it easy just so we can visualize this. If Illinois residents vote 51 to 49 for President A, that means President A is not going to get like 51% of Illinois' points. It's going to get all of them. If 49 people voted for President B, President B will get 0 electoral points from Illinois. 0. Even though almost half of the people in Illinois voted for President B, they might as well have stayed home, because at the end of the day, their votes will not count at all towards actually electing the president. All of Illinois' points are going to go towards President A, because it's winner take all. This happens in 48 states. And this is why you see the maps that you do, and we're going to talk about this in the next video, why you see the maps that you do in the Electoral College, and why you see also presidents don't go to every state, because they know they can't win, or they know they're going to win, so they don't want to spend any retail value there. We're talking about that a little bit. So why does this work? How does this work? What happened? The original concept of the Electoral College was, you got to think, this was back in the horse and buggy times. And it was about getting information to people and making people have informed decisions. When you're doing an election, you want to make sure the most recent information is given to the people. So technically, we put our votes to the state. Our state, Illinois, has a select number of points that will be awarded to a candidate. But actually what it is, those points are each an individual person. I know, this is crazy. Think about this. All of our electoral points in Illinois, our 20 electoral points, are actually 20 electors, actual people. We are voting for actual people that will actually cast their ballots for president in December. A lot of people think the election for the president is in November. No, the one that actually matters is in December, because all these electors, actual people, will go to Washington and cast their vote for President of the United States. They do not actually have to cast their vote for the president that your state chose. They have no law saying that they have to. In 87 or 88 times in history, they voted differently than what their state told them to. Has this ever swayed an election? Absolutely not. but they are actually allowed to vote differently. Now, here's why this system was put in place, but it's kind of obsolete now, is back then you had to ride a horse all the way to D.C. By the time you get to D.C. to cast this vote for your state, what if you have new information that you know should be important before casting this vote? Like, you get there and find out the president just had a shady deal with, like, a different country. Well, they don't know about that, but I'm a representative and I'm their elector. I know they wanted me to vote for this candidate, but this is going to be bad for all of us. I can vote for this one because I have the new information. Now, because we don't have to worry about taking information via horse, we can send it via digital cable or wirelessly, that we don't really need an elector to do that. I mean, we are pretty informed. We're like over-informed, and maybe some people less informed, but generally speaking, we live in the information age. It's just a different system for a different time. That's why it just seems weird why we vote for the state to then send individual electors to go to DC to then cast points toward it's crazy. Okay, so this is kind of the electoral system as a general outlook. Every single state's going to get at least 3, but we're going to talk about that in the next video. Let's get to the numbers on the board. You've been seeing in class, and I've been talking about and going to be talking about for a while, all the way up to the election, because it's kind of important. I'm leaving this up at least to the election because I think it's going to be important to understand what to look for. Every single state, regardless of population, from the smallest state of Wyoming to whatever, you're like, Rhode Island's the smallest. Geographically, the smallest population, they're not. Whatever state you have, you get 3 electoral votes. That's how much you get to start with, period, point blank. You're getting 3. But based on population, if you actually look at this from a population standpoint, you probably shouldn't get 3. It's giving a boost. It's giving like a booster shot to the smaller populated states. But if you do that, that means bigger states are actually going to have some issue getting the same electoral weight. Now you're like, Mr. Snow, I watch this all the time, and I know that California has 55 electoral votes, which is just so much, Mr. Snow. They are so much advantaged. They're not actually advantaged based on the Electoral College. They're actually disadvantaged. The Electoral College, the way it's set up, is because we're giving more voting power, electoral voting power, to smaller states, that power has to come from a bigger state. And what it really means is the individual voter, me as a voter, if I was a voter in Wyoming, I actually have 3 times more voting power than that of California because my state gets more electoral points than I probably should based on my population. Now let's talk about the map. We've talked about this map before, and we talked about how certain states are mostly blue, and certain states are half blue, and some states are all red, and some states are half red. Then we talked about the swing states. And here's the Electoral College, why it means presidents will probably not come to Illinois and campaign. Illinois is typically a blue state, which means it typically votes for Democrat. And since it's the proportion of Illinois votes for a Democrat so much, the chances of a Republican winning is really little because, remember, it's winner take all. So Republicans typically don't come to Illinois to campaign. You haven't seen Trump come this year, and you're not going to. Because they don't think they have the chance to get that 51%, and because they can get the 51% of the popular vote, what's the point of coming down here? It's going to be a waste of time. Democrats won't, vice versa, they won't come down here because most likely they're just going to be like, well, I'm going to get that state anyway, so why should I waste my time there? What happens is, because it's a winner-take-all system, except for the 2 states, which is Maine and I believe Nebraska, because it's winner-take-all, if the candidate doesn't feel like they have any slight chance at all of pulling off a 51% victory inside the popular vote of that state, they're not going to show up. They're going to show up to the swing states. We talked about this before. Now, I'll talk about this in class, but the idea of we have 50 states plus DC, but 50 states that are voting. You have the popular vote in each one of those states is really the thing you're going for. Candidates typically don't even go to half of the states. Actually, that's being generous. Since both Biden and Trump, and this is not just this election. This is elections all day in modern day. So since their primary wins, which means Trump is going to be nominated as the Republican, Biden is going to be nominated as the Democratic, they've only visited 17 of the 50 states. And of those 17, after the first 5 weeks, of those 17, some of them they only visited once, and some of them actually, in 5 of them, just 5 of those 17 states, they spent half their time there. So what are these states? They're the swing states. the majority of the election for presidents are in swing states. We talked about them in class. This year, Florida is a big swing state. Right now, 10 visits. This was just 5 weeks after their nomination. It's been more since then. But 10 visits after 5 weeks of their nomination of their party. Pennsylvania, 14. That's a swing state. You have North Carolina, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Colorado. And also Nevada. Those states have seen the presidents a lot, or I should say presidential candidates a lot. And that has to do with the fact that it's a winner-take-all system, and you're not going to see Joe Biden go to California because he's already got that system locked down. And you're not going to see Trump go to California because he doesn't think he's going to get the 51%, so why waste the capital there? Because they only have so much time and money to go. So really what this turns out to be is instead of having a system that pushes them to go see all the states, it's really a system that pushes them to go to see about, 1/5. And that's probably giving them more than they should. But it is what it is. As we go through this election in this next month, I want you to pay attention to what states that they're going to. I want you to know why they're going to those states. Because right now you have Florida, and Florida's, I'm telling you, it's key for the Republicans. Right now, the way the electoral map is set up for Republicans and Democrats, if they don't win Florida, they're not winning the presidential election. And then also, you're going to see them spend a whole lot of time in Ohio. You're going to see them spend a little time in Michigan and a whole lot of time in Iowa and Wisconsin. It's in Pennsylvania, too. Pennsylvania's a big one. Pennsylvania is somewhat blue, but last time it flipped. And now it's kind of like a swing state this time around. So you're going to see them a lot of time there. Swing states, man. Electoral colleges basically make them like the golden boy. Matter of fact, when you watch election night, which I'm going to probably make an assignment, you're going to see that the people that are talking, they're just going to be talking about these swing states. They're going to be talking about Florida. They're going to be talking about Ohio, Pennsylvania. And then when it gets later in the night, they'll start talking about Michigan and Iowa and Wisconsin, eventually Colorado and Nevada. But those are the states they're really going to talk about. They're going to see okay, old Delaware went for Biden. Oh, okay. Tennessee went for Trump. And then let's talk about Florida again. That's what's going to happen. So, it is what it is. All right. Enough of the Electoral College nonsense. I'll see you in class.